Hello, everyone. Welcome to Conexão Metabooks number 5. A little explanation em português. Se você está assistindo pela primeira vez o Conexão Metabooks, ela é transmitida em inglês e dentro de uma semana, mais ou menos, ela será disponibilizada a versão com legendagem. So now we switch to English. So welcome our guests. Thank you very much for being with us. Today with us, we have Rüdiger Wischenbart. I hope I said right his name. He's from Austria. He's the founder of Content and Consulting since 2003 and a writer specialized in culture, cultural industries, global book markets, innovation in the book industry, and related issues. He served as director of communication to the Frankfurt Book Fair from 2005 until 2016, and as director of 1998 to 2001. Oh, my mistake. Sorry, Rüdiger. Director of International Affairs to Book Expo America from 2005 and 2016, and Director of Programming to Publishers Forum in Berlin. He conducts extensive research on the international publishing industry, and for those who used to go to the Frankfurt Book Fair, he's the guy behind the CEO talk. He's the mind and the soul of that. We have also with us, thank you very much for being with us, Rüdiger. We have Luíz Gaspar. He's a Brazilian living in Spain, and he's graduated in social communication. And currently, he's the director at Nielsen Book Latin America. And today, we have a special guested host. Our host is going to be Marcelo Gioia. He is the director of Bookwire Brasil. Welcome, everyone. Marcelo now is with you. Our public, if you want to ask questions, please just write on the chat, and we are going to try to address those questions as well. Welcome, Marcelo.
Thank you, Ricardo. It's a real. I'm glad to be here and be invited from Metabooks. Thank you, Metabooks. And it's a very high privilege to talk to these giant guys in numbers and statistics like Rüdiger and Luis. And I have thought about a dynamic. I will present to you guys some statements and perceptions that are being raised during the pandemic, and you guys can somehow throw some light, saying that, okay, it's a myth, it's not a myth, it's true, it's not so true, in your local markets and not the local markets, but also in the markets that you both monitor somehow. But before that, I would like to tackle the size of the monster. When the pandemic starts to spread all over the world, what we are facing? What really is the face of this guide of this pandemic that is impacting so much the publishing world, that you are kind of fighting since beginning of the year, since March, and this last month. So, Rüdiger and Luis, what is the size of this monster that you are facing?
Can I change the metaphor, please?
Okay.
From the guy and the monster to a beehive. Yeah? Mm-hmm. You have a hive, and you have many, many bees, and they are flying around all over the place. And that's entirely different from the thought of having one big monster, one big enemy. It's perhaps not even an enemy. They are adjusting, like any swarm, very quickly to anything that changes out there, because they are behaving in very complicated ecosystems. And what we've seen is that the grounds where they were harvesting and where they were finding flowers, where they could harvest their honey, their sugar and their honey that is produced out of this, that was changing totally. And so, to stick with agriculture, we saw that suddenly the book world is so much more embedded into a huge ecosystem, where suddenly new dynamics, new fields, new targets have shown up. And at the same time, privileged destinations from the past have totally lost in importance, partly by the lockdown, but also partly by earlier, already pre-COVID existing transformations that have become much more prevalent than what we thought before. Yeah. So I guess what we are facing is a tremendous change, but not in one dimension, not in one direction, but in many directions, right? And that makes it, on the one hand, more difficult to confront, because when you have just one enemy, you take out a big gun and you think you are very almighty and you shoot the guy and hopefully you hit the monster and then it drops dead and everything is again as it used to be. But if you try to take out the big gun and shoot the bees from a beehive swarming around, that strategy will not be very successful. So we need really, and that's the main challenge in my view, we need to change profoundly strategies in interacting, reacting, proactively acting in a changing environment.
Yeah. Okay, but changing the metaphor, Luis, from the monster to the beehive, as Rüdiger very well suggested, it's a better metaphor than mine. But how is the size of this beehive, and how are these dimensions that are kind of attacking us, or not attacking as an enemy, but maybe giving us some opportunities, but you are facing at the moment as a publishing industry?
Okay, very good question. So, but first of all, let me talk about Rüdiger's metaphor, because I think it reflects a much deeper understanding of this crisis, how complex, how heterogeneous this crisis is. So one thing that we can tell is that it happened differently across all the territories that we cover, at least. So the way it happened in Brazil is different than the way it happened in UK, that it happened in Spain, New Zealand, and still happening. So I think that's a very interesting point of view, because actually thinking about a monster, hopefully if it was like this, it was you could tackle that with one shot. So I agree that is. The other aspect is that it impacts across all the territories in different levels. So for example, I can tell that in Europe, for example, Spain or Italy, the lockdown was completely. So at the beginning, the first weeks of the lockdown here, it almost, the entire market almost decreased 70%. Of course, right now this is recovering. For the last week, we can say that because all the stores are reopening now. So this week that we're reporting, for example, the volume sales are pretty much the same that it was last year, but it's still the impact for the whole year. It's a lot. So comparing the year to date for Spain and the Europe overall, right now it's decreasing 30% against last year. On the other hand, in South America, the lockdown was different. It wasn't a completely lockdown like it was here in Europe. So the impact wasn't as deep as it was here. However, the recovery is being in a different pace. So But on the other hand, we can give the example of Brazil that is in this year to date is decreasing only 10% comparing to last year. So I think it shows a little bit how this crisis is complex and it's working different across different markets like Brazil or Europe, in this case Spain or Italy.
So Rüdiger, what is the size of the beehive through your lenses from the places that you are carefully monitoring?
Let me try to focus on two countries for the moment, one being Germany, the other being France. For Germany, we have something like, I guess, 60%. Wait a moment, I have several reports in front of me. I need to switch a little bit. The German Publishers and Booksellers Association says that in brick and mortar retail, in books, during the lockdown, retailers lost 65% of turnover. So that's massive, and that's very much consistent with what we just heard from Luis about Spain. In France, it's a little bit different, and I have to look to the other side of my notes. Wait a moment. I never trust my memory. That's why I'm looking up. We saw a big fall of 56% or something for March lockdown, and now again minus 20% for May when shops already reopened. So in both countries, Germany and France, you have fairly stable, robust, well-enrooted and well-protected book businesses. And yet they were really going down from one day to the next. And year on year, I see again, wait a moment, no, here, no. Year on year, we see 15, 16, 17% of loss over the last, as compared to a year ago. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So that you can say, okay, it's dramatic because these are two stable markets which are not used to big shakeups. They are not like Spain, which has seen minus 30%. Losing 1/3 of the book market after the crisis of 2008. In Germany, everybody is very dramatically complaining, or in France the same, when the market goes down by 2-3%. But over time, if you were looking at the long perspective, 10 years since the crisis of 2008, you saw a consistent decline in revenue, in turnover, which was only held up recently by increasing prices, which is not a very good strategy when at the same time Börsenverein is tracking the number of people who buy books and read books in the first place. And here you have a continued erosion over the last decade. So you have a gap opening, which is never closing, narrowing, this, regardless of any policy counteractions that we have seen. Between 2012, which was the peak with roughly 37 million people who were buying books in Germany, that went down by almost 1/3 to 29 million who are still buying books in 2019, and that is continuing. And in that fragile situation, when we say, okay, the market is now going down by year on year, first half year including the lockdown, by any drop in the 2 digits. That is really crucial, number one. Number two, when we look more closely, we see again that the turnover is a little bit higher than the number of copies sold because prices continue to be increased. Mm-hmm. So the number of books bought is going down. And the next gap that is opening very, very clearly is between brick and mortar bookstores, so the old backbone of the industry, and the rest. And we see that all the indicators for the brick and mortar bookstores are significantly lower than the overall picture. So we have really a landscape that where major shifts in the foundations are occurring. Yeah, and that is what is preoccupying my mind, because when I see at the same time the public industry debate, what association people, what the trade media are discussing in France or Germany, then it is always about that fantasy. Oh, it's a shake-up now. The lockdown lasted 6 weeks, 7 weeks, 8 weeks, but now it's open, it's over, and bookstores are reopening, and we are going back into life. And I think that's a wrong conception of the shift, the foundations shifting that I just tried to explain with these numbers.
Mm-hmm. So we can say that's a very complex beehive and requires from the publishing market a multi-dimensional effort in order to overcome somehow, or even to live with it. Let's go to the perceptions that I mentioned before. One of the words that I'm listening a lot is acceleration, meaning that the pandemic does not create anything new, but is accelerating new adoptions, accelerating new alternative channels, accelerating new models. In other words, bringing the curve to a different angle of the growth of the adoption, maybe. So how do you see? Is this true? It's accelerating things in one terms, or it's not true? How you both see this accelerating perception from the publishing managers in overall? Luis?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think it's also acceleration, but consolidation could be as well. I think it will reflect in terms of channels and formats. I think that we'll be discussing. For sure, during this crisis, this COVID crisis, and we can see here the online channel is consolidated. And during this crisis, I think during almost 2 months, the only way possible was by the online channel. So it determines pretty much the consolidation. And in some cases, for some, I think specifically for indie shops, the acceleration of they're going to online channels, which is much more complicated than big chains that we're going to see. The other aspect, I think it's related to formats, as you can see, probably, the adoption of audiobooks and ebooks during those times, especially in countries where it's not mature yet, like Brazil, like in South America in general. But I think it's to be seen how it's going to be after or when we reach this new normality. So I think that is my perspective about this acceleration / consolidation in my view as well.
Okay.
I'm sorry. We just did a fairly deep and detailed and granular study on real sales data of digital distribution. One provider of such data was Bookwire, by the way, with data covering Germany, Spain and Latin America, Brazil and Mexico, but also others like Libranda, like Edigita in Italy. So we had the French-speaking part of Canada, and we were really looking into that in much detail. And we did that not for the first time, but for the third time, for 3 years in a row. And the result is a very thick brochure or book of some 80 pages with charts. And what we saw already over time is how different these different digital market segments have been all the time. If you look into ebooks by genre category, you very quickly recognize that romance books behave totally different from thrillers, and educational books or nonfiction doesn't play a big role. Regardless of the country, you also see that pricing is a totally complicated, complex thing where some user communities would just go for one price segment, some for the higher, others for the lower, but wouldn't hardly mix. And when we were redoing that with data very recently now, during the lockdown, which we could for Bookwire in the case of Germany, we realized significant changes, accelerations of the specialization within a very short period of time. Let me give you 2 examples. One, we had dramatic peaks in just one genre category. In one moment, up it went through the roof. And that was usually very clearly related when contextual market changes, like a lockdown, no bookstores open and all the kids at home, with good directed marketing campaigns of a retail chain, of a digital retailer, or of a publisher, or both. So you see how volatile that market is in the segment. But we also could see a dramatic difference between digital sales when you buy a book, audiobook or ebook, one title at a time, like a physical book, as compared to ongoing offers, subscription, streaming, library lending. You saw a big peak instantly, really the week after the lockdown started. And 2 weeks later, that peak in ebook sales was gone again. So it was just crazy. Everyone was crazy trying to stock books. And then they didn't have time to read those books properly. So why would they restock afterwards? The other thing was streaming offers. They were rising continuously. And again, the topics, the genre categories were totally different. Suddenly, children books, expectedly, that's not a big surprise with all the kids at home and not at school, were gaining dramatically, but also nonfiction, things that were kind of professional learning or stuff like this. And thriller. But romance, no one seemed to bother about romance novels during the lockdown. Why? My theory, at least, is because that is connected to commuting to work. Yeah. So suddenly you see how little changes on various levels have deep impact. Mm-hmm. Yeah? And when we speak of acceleration, that's what I mean. That's very, very strong, but it shows us how non-mature these digital markets are. And that is also a good news, a very positive news, because it says, there is a lot to be gained. But it's also a challenging news because it requires that you start to really understand your specific market segment and say, okay, I'm in children books, or I'm in nonfiction professional education, or I'm in thrillers or in romance. And in each case, I have to really understand my market, and I have to react. I have really to reach out to the consumer, and I really have to know who are my consumers. And that brings me to a last argument. My main complaint about the industry is that in general, the book business sees only a very slim demographics niche as their target audience. They don't expect, in the case of Germany or France, immigrant populations to be their customers potentially. They just see the middle class. We know these book and reading demographics, and I think by going into these specifics and by seeing how good pointed marketing makes really an impact and an effect, it would push us to reconsider our role to recreate marketing in a much more targeted way. And that's again the beehive, because then I can plant a little field with specific flowers somewhere, and suddenly I reach out into totally different territories. So for me, it's a very interesting, challenging, but also mind-opening period that we are going through.
Yeah, it's interesting how we are going beyond the numbers in order to bring us maybe try to understand a little bit of the complexity of the beehive. But let's try to dig a little bit deeper on the formats. I will give you some Brazilian numbers from the angle and point of view of the Bookwire, which has a pretty much large chunk of the market. We have seen some spikes in March when we started the lockdown in March 13, I think. A very good April month, which is probably 3 times the kind of sales that we did in April 19. A better May, slightly better May, around 10% better than April. And an even better June, which is around 25% better than May. The first week of July, we're starting to see some decline, but it's still two times higher than last year, July. So is Brazilian a different experience, as you were saying, of the different markets, or how are the numbers that you were seeing in other markets from the digital adoption, which might be accelerating?
It's very curious what you say, Marcelo, because we see a very similar behavior when we talk about the online channel. We see lots of people going to the online channel, and now when we see also the brick and mortar stores reopening, we see that there's a part of these consumers that maintain their sales and their way of buying books online, and they'll keep that. So for sure, I think it leveraged people that will be buying different formats and will stay buying that, and the same for different channels. In this case, I think the online for practical reasons. So that's very similar to what we're seeing in our numbers.
So
I can not add numbers because I don't have them so in such granularity and so timely for the last couple of weeks or so. But I would like to add one set of questions. When, as Luis just did so, when we discuss formats and channels, I would be very, very interested in tracking little groups of titles that are behaving in an interesting way. If there are timelines between print and digital, downloads and subscriptions and online library lendings, etc. So my gut feeling, I don't have the numbers clearly, but my gut feeling is that we would see a journey across formats and channels over time, which again is a very, very deep lesson for any marketeer and for any distribution person. To say, wait a moment, I don't need a strategy by format or by channel. I need a strategy that goes over time and picks up flowers all along the way, but different flowers, meaning some sales here, some sales there, etc. I had a conversation this morning with a colleague from Carlsen, from Egmont, Saga Egmont. This is their digital division now, who are very strongly going into streaming and audiobooks, etc. And it was very funny. The way she described what they were doing was differently, in that she said, yes, and we can pick up a few sales here, and then we take a few sales there. And she was not a salesperson. She's the editor-in-chief. She's the content person, the content manager. But she suddenly understands and makes it her strategy to create a timeline and pick up sales in a cumulative way. And obviously, the bottom line, according to what she told me, was very good.
Mm-hmm. Good. Another perception from what I've been listening from publishers and from the market, you already mentioned it, but maybe we could go a little bit deeper also, is about the new channels that might be accelerated. You already mentioned the online e-commerce channel. Also already mentioned the indie bookstores channels, alternative channels. So in terms of statistics, how is this true? Is the alternative channel being now the talk of the city, the talk of the town, or not? What you can say about it? I mean, publishers are in need to be very creative in order to understand the beehive, in order to understand the marketing that is needed to be built in order to support the new channels acceleration, the new format acceleration, in order to have their content out there in a better way during incredible difficult situation that the pandemic brought us. So channels, in terms of channels, what the numbers are showing. Again,
Marcelo, I think the first thing I was going to say is that I don't believe there's a new channel here, because the online channel is not really new. Indie shops are also not really new. Probably they're the oldest channel here in this market, the small shops. So I think that's my first consideration here. We're not talking really about new channels, but probably what is new here is the approach towards them. Probably what is new is, for example, that the indie shops really need to survive to get into the online business model. However, in different countries, we're going to have different challenges. Like in Spain, it's a completely different challenge than in Brazil, a continental country. So, freight is always a problem in Brazil, So I think this is one thing. If we're talking about new channels, we could be talking about publishers selling directly, maybe subscription clubs. So I think those are actually really new channels for those markets. What we see is, for example, like we said before, the online much more consolidated during these times, but it's still brick and mortar shops they play a very important role, especially for European markets, for example. I think I've mentioned 50% of the sales here are in indie shops for Spain, for Italy, for example. So still, we're not talking about really new channels. However, new ways of working, new strategies, new approach that they have to work during this crisis. Certainly that.
Okay. Rüdiger?
I very much agree about that core statement of Luis, saying there are at the moment no new channels, because even self-publishing, which is a fairly new channel, is well established has found its share of the market, even if many observers just ignore it, it's there. What I see more in terms of novel patterns that matter, that are relevant, is the conversations and the attention of the audience. I only started to collect a few slides and a few charts tracking the shift of online behavior, not buying behavior, but where people are moving around online on their mobile phones during the past 4, 5, 6 months. And you see very dramatic things that go into the direction of specialization. You have certain channels where there was a big uptick because it was more entertainment. But there were different channels bringing people information. Books did not occupy, and particularly non-fiction books, did not figure in these growing channels. So obviously, in a time where orientation in terms of news and facts were very high in demand, books could not fulfill or occupy a relevant role. That's a very dramatic statement for the book trade. Mm-hmm. The same thing about entertainment. Much of the surge in entertainment, from what I understood, I'm not certain, but I found some indicators. Much of the entertainment just goes into moving pictures. Yeah, TV series, etc. We know this online. At the same time, because it was much too quick and short and new, literary online entertainment, author readings that were really professional and were driven by marketing and retail campaigns, etc., could not be set up within 2 months or so. But over time, over the next couple of years, I'm sure that things will pop up here. So my main interest here would not be just looking into the sales channels for books, but looking into where do the conversations about stories, about content, about relevant questions that people are preoccupied by, where do these conversations occur, and how do these conversations shift? Because I'm fairly convinced that there is a lot of shift in these conversations taking place right now, and that will result in deep shifts in consumer behavior.
Okay, guys, very, very well. Trying to sum up what you said and what we said about formats, channels, beehive metaphor, complexity, multidimensional responses, and needs to deeper understand marketing actions and the construction of how to respond to the needs of the customers, and the sentence that Rüdiger used, the major shifts in fundamentals. How you guys, from the angle that you are from, you guys see the horizon? What is coming from publishers in terms of pragmatical day-to-day for the next maybe months or year? What is in the future for the publishing market?
Wow, Marcelo.
So Luis,
don't you have a harder question?
I know nobody. I know we don't have crystal balls, or I don't know how this is in English, but I think it's crystal ball. We don't have magic balls, but you have perceptions, you have signs, you have references, you have numbers, you have trends, statistics, and projections. So, and most of all, you have feelings and intuition. So, as statistical guys, what lies ahead?
I think I can start with what I said before. I think it's a very heterogeneous crisis. So it's completely different how it is behaving and how it's happening currently across different territories. I think I gave examples from Europe and Latin America. And I think the result will be completely different. One thing that I didn't mention is that different markets were caught in the middle of different crises. So here in Spain, as Rüdiger said, I think since 2008, the market is decreasing 40% here. So this was already a crisis that they were having here. One of the solutions was exportation. So during this crisis, you can imagine how impacted they were. So I think these are one of the things that they have to rework. And I think as stores and markets are reopening, I think we need a little bit more time to understand how it goes. We don't know for sure if there will be a second wave, if there will be a second lockdown, which I hope we don't have. But it's still really hard, very unpredictable to understand how things will behave this year. The other example is it's Brazil, for example. We were caught in the middle of a crisis of a retail crisis. Big chains and having this problem, and then in the middle of that, we add a new layer of problems brought by the COVID.
Crisis on top of crisis here, and
crisis on top of crisis. So what was already really hard to predict, right now you add again a new layer of unpredictability, if that's the correct word. So I think it's really hard to say what will happen, but I think as you said, the disciplines within publishers and bookshops, the know-how that they will need to develop in a much higher pace, in a much faster pace right now, that what will change for sure. Indie shops, they need to reinvent, the way they sell, they do their sales, in a way that we know already that because of the lockdowns, because of I'm not really sure in Brazil if that's the future, but for other countries where the lockdown is happening, being really prepared to have this online store, this is right now, I think, almost the basics. So, and this is not really not all the, especially for indie shops, not all of them have this expertise. So this is what we need to change definitely from now on, and accelerate with this kind of skills, developing these skills within publishers and bookshops.
Okay, Rüdiger, what is in our horizon?
I would like to address this on two different angles. One about the big guys, the big organizations, and the second one about the small organizations. For the big organizations, on the one hand, I had a conversation a few weeks ago with Michael Tamlin, the head of Kobo Books, and he was fairly forthcoming and good, because he said they were so used as a distributed, decentralized company to even socially behave within virtual teams, even welcoming new staff members without them ever sitting in the same office under the same lamp within a team, so that he was fairly upbeat that they could adjust and digest these impulses. 2 or 3 days after that conversation, I read a big piece in Publishers Weekly about Random House, but the same Penguin Random House, but the same would apply probably to Macmillan or Simon & Schuster and the other big 5 companies in New York, about when they perhaps come back to their offices in September or later, how many measures in these skyscrapers they had to implement to distance, to create the distance between the people working there, how to manage the complexity of having 2,000 people stepping into an elevator and arriving at their workplace without neglecting the distancing, etc., etc. And then you think about the emotional dimension when these organizations, by being so stiff and so driven by rules and regulations, when they confront the risk of falling apart, that their teams become dysfunctional, and you don't know what happens to these organizations. And at the same time, we know that the controllers in these organizations are very, very much doing their math in saying, how can we shift our complete working routines in order to reduce our costs from office spaces? How can we do this and that and this? That tells me these big organizations, on the one hand, have huge challenges that they are now reflecting and preparing for, but they also have the means to reinvent, at least some of them will do, reinvent themselves and be different companies in a year or two. And that's massive. Yeah, it's good and bad, but it's different. Yeah, and that will bring them perhaps even more in line with a big media company like Netflix or Disney, and that will have lots of effects. Now look at the small companies, the retailer at the corner, the small publishers. Already today, after a decade or a decade and a half of declining average print runs and reduced sales, because all the market developments of the past several years were always taking the advantage to the big ones and enforcing the pressure on the small guys. They don't have the leisure or the time or the money for experimentation. They need to try to get the next book out and make some money with this. So the commercial pressure, the stress will increase dramatically. And I just can quote, I don't know how many voices who predict that we will lose a fair number of these small guys, who at the same time are those who guarantee the diversity, and much of the innovation comes also from these small organizations. So what I see is that we will need to expect shifts in the very fabric of how that industry is operating. And my most important wish would be that when we talk about subsidies and support methods, etc., we really focus on the small organizations and these parts of the fabric, and not just in a paternalistic way that some big guys give some chunks of money to these poor little chaps, but that we really open spaces where they can experiment, move, reinvent themselves as well, so that we maintain that diversity in the industry. And here I come back to one of my favorite points, to also increase the demographics that we address, because that's the main factor of survival for the entire book business, to enlarge, to differentiate the ways that we work, the demographics that we address, and the diversity in the staffs of our companies.
Okay.
There's an aspect here, actually, just to complement. I think there's an aspect that we didn't touch with this governmental subsidy. So how we are organized as an industry to pressure government to help those small players, small publishers, small bookshops. So we see those different in different countries that moving in different ways. So I can tell that here in Spain there are organizations and discussions about that, and I think that is crucial for different industry for this industry from now on. So this political dimension that we didn't talk that much, that is actually crucial for this industry.
Yeah, you're right. Okay, guys. From my side, I think Ricardo will close. But from my side, I wanted to thank you. I really think that the answers we got, and it is recorded now, is going to be extremely important because it brings very relevant subjects and issues and questions to help to do what we do in terms of creating, distributing, selling content. Thanks a lot, Rüdiger. Thanks a lot, Luis. Ricardo is with you now.
Thank you, everyone. I just want to thank you very much for your insights. Very, very enlightening, this conversation. For our public, we are going to publish for you the websites where you can find information about Rüdiger, about Luis. So Nielsen Book, Rüdiger publishes on global/ebook.com. It's a report he publishes. The visionbar.com, bookmap.org. So we are going to put all this on our social media. It's going to be easier for you to find and connect with them and be more familiar with their work if you are not yet. And hopefully in a few weeks, we could come back here and discuss the answers that we had today. Thank you very much. Have a very nice evening. Everyone has a very good night for you guys based in Europe. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
for having
Bye-bye.
us.
Bye-bye. Thank you.